Hey everyone. It's an article out of the Globe and Mail. Headline: Canada's beer smuggler is our new national hero. I wouldn't necessarily use the term beer smuggler, but hey, it's the establishment media, so you know it's all about sensationalized bullshit, right? Tabloid style reporting. But this is in reference to Gerard Como. If you haven't heard yet, he's the guy that bought a bunch of beer in Quebec and took it back to his home in New Brunswick. Because in case you're not aware of it, if you're not from the East Coast, beer is fucking ridiculously overpriced and expensive in places like New Brunswick. But if you just go across the border to Quebec, you can get a whole lot cheaper. So a lot of Canadians do that. You know, especially a lot of guys on the East Coast. You got a lot of Irish dudes over there, right? So it's like, I'm going to get my beer and I'm stockpiling so I can bring it back and drink a little cheaper with the boys, right? And it should be that way. I mean, hello, this is Canada, right? It's a big, gigantic country. We've got a whole bunch of provinces, but the whole pretense of having a country of Canada, right, a national country, is provincial trades. There's not supposed to be any barriers. It's supposed to be free trade in our own country. I mean, look at the fact that Trudeau's running around, China and NAFTA and all these other fucking countries and the EU looking for these free trade agreements when in reality, there isn't even one that's recognized properly in Canada, in our own country. The politicians, the media pundits, and some of these fucking stupid judges, they don't even recognize the fact that, hey, we're supposed to have free trade in our country. When you cross the line from New Brunswick to Quebec, there's no border there other than the fact that, you know, that's an imaginary line. And there might be a scale for trucks to have to stop into or rest area where you can say, oh, welcome to Quebec. But there's no border check, right? It's supposed to be a free country. We're supposed to be able to travel freely and buy products freely without any duties or impositions or regulations restricting the fact that we have free trade in this entire country. You should really, theoretically and practically, you should be able to go if you want to go all the way to BC and buy products and bring it back to New Brunswick. Hey, that's totally, even if you have to go through 8 provinces to do it, you should be able to do it because we're supposed to be one big country. You know, it's not a whole bunch of individual nations. The whole pretense of nationalize everything and having a country called Canada, you know, is that the provinces have free trade amongst each other. But as we see time and time again, a lot of these special interest groups or the crony corporatists, they want to use some clause from, back in the 1920s or something, that's, you got to really stretch that out to create any barriers or restrictions on trade within the provinces. Anyways, let me just read from this article and we'll get to some of these points anyways. Andrew Potter is an associate professor at the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. Is Canada a real country? Reading over the submissions in RV Como this week, you might well wonder. That's because one by one, the provinces, territories, and even the federal government lined up on Wednesday to argue that Gerard Como was in the wrong. In 2012, when he took a quick trip across the border into Quebec from his home in Tracadie, New Brunswick, to pick up some cheap beer. Caught in a sting and handed a nearly $300 ticket for smuggling contraband, Mr. Como demanded his day in court. He argued that the prohibition against transporting booze across provincial lines violated Section 121 of Canada's Constitutional Act of 1867, which on any plain reading promises free trade of goods between the provinces. And miracle of miracles, he won. And having won in provincial court and with the Court of Appeal punting it upstairs, he's been dragged to the Supreme Court of Canada to argue his case. And his case, in a nutshell, is pretty compelling. As he put it in the legalese of the common man after his victory in 2016. The way I look at it, I'm a Canadian citizen. I don't see any reason why I can't go buy merchandise anywhere in this country and bring it home. You can buy anything else like cars, clothes, everything, except for beer. QED, Your Honor. Except this is Canada, where there is no such thing as a plain reading of the Constitution, especially when alcohol. It's really amazing how much of our Constitution comes down to booze. Producer cartels and provincial interests align. Everyone is hanging their hopes on the Supreme Court upholding the Prohibition-era Gold Seal ruling from 1921. which defended an excessively narrow ruling of Section 121 of the Constitution. And so, as you might expect, everyone is lined up against Mr. Cuomo, but in the surest sign that what's going on is rank special pleading, everyone has a different reason for why he's wrong. It's about the money, says New Brunswick, which has the virtue of honesty. No, it's to prevent the dreaded market forces from diving everyone into an uncontrollable race to the bottom, British Columbia says. Ontario, where some days it is evident the state's instincts regarding vice haven't involved much since Prohibition, just thinks there's no real reason to revisit the past. Federal officials are being all wishy-washy, imploring the court to take a nuanced approach. Nunavut argues that it's about public health, and at least they have something of an argument. But for whatever reason, everyone agrees that Mr. Cuomo's acquittal cannot stand. Everyone, that is, except the people, which should be the ultimate arbiters and deciders when you think about it in a democracy, right? It's not supposed to be a top-down rule by central planning edict. Because despite what their respective provincial, territorial, and federal governments think, Canadians think they should be able to buy any legal product anywhere in the country and take it wherever they please. According to a recent poll by Ipsos Public Affairs and commissioned by the Montreal Economics Institute, 89% of Canadians think Mr. Cuomo is right, that Canadians should be able to bring any legal product from one province to another. That's almost 9 in 10 Canadians, which pretty much has to amount to every Canadian who doesn't have a personal stake in maintaining the status quo. So I'll post a link to this article in the description of the video below, but I think we've covered enough. Think about it. If 90%, 89, right, percent of the population, and the whole point of federalizing or having one big country called Canada and having any reasonable pretense of free trade, which only makes sense, right? If all that stuff means anything at all, then of course Mr. Cuomo is right, and of course the Supreme Court should err in his favor and on the side of liberty, and hand Mr. Cuomo a victory, and hand Canadians a victory that, like they say, has much, much larger implications. This isn't just a matter of grabbing a few beers and taking them across borders, right? Think about what that means for your social and economic lives outside of just having a few chuggies, having a few brown pops, right? Or your drink of choice. Come on, Supreme Court. Can we start moving that goalpost further back to where it should be and placing an emphasis on freedoms and liberties instead of crony corporatists and government mandates and edicts? Skinny Libertarian, and I love liberty.